Imagine waking up tomorrow and every supermarket is closed. No deliveries, no imports, no fresh food on the shelves. You still have money in your pocket, but there's nothing left to buy. What do you eat when the system you depend on simply disappears? Most people would panic. But food didn't vanish. We just forgot where to look. Today, I'm going to show you 10 plants that could keep you alive when the stores are gone.
1. Sagittaria latifolia. Along the slow-moving rivers, marshes, and shallow pond edges of North America, a plant with arrow-shaped leaves and small white flowers grows above the waterline. Sagittaria latifolia, known as arrowhead or wapato, produces starchy, potato-like tubers beneath the mud that served as a foundational food source for dozens of indigenous nations. During their 1804 expedition, Lewis and Clark relied on wapato traded by the Chinook people. The tubers were boiled, roasted, dried, or ground into flour. Harvesting requires nothing more than wading into shallow water and loosening the mud underfoot. The tubers float to the surface. They cook and taste much like potatoes. Arrowhead disappeared from mainstream food culture for a simple reason. Wetlands can't support industrial agriculture. Tractors don't work in marshes.
As wetlands were drained and converted, the knowledge of how to use what grew in them faded alongside them.
2. Colocasia esculenta. Taro. Taro is among humanity's oldest cultivated crops, with a cultivation history estimated at roughly 10,000 years. Before rice, wheat, or corn came to dominate regional diets across Asia and the Pacific, Colocasia esculenta fed entire island civilizations in Polynesia, sustained communities in West Africa, and remains a dietary staple in parts of the world that retained direct food sovereignty. The corm, the starchy underground base, is calorie-dense, highly digestible, and versatile. It can be boiled, steamed, fermented, or processed into poi. The leaves are also edible when cooked thoroughly. One preparation note matters. Raw taro contains calcium oxalate crystals that cause intense oral and throat irritation. It must be fully cooked before consumption. Once cooked, it functions as one of the more complete plant-based caloric sources available. Industrial food systems moved away from taro because it requires moisture, careful preparation, and accumulated knowledge. None of those qualities suited large-scale mechanized production. 3. Artocarpus altilis. Breadfruit. In the 18th century, colonial administrators identified breadfruit as an exceptionally productive food source. The 1789 voyage of the Bounty was commissioned specifically to transport breadfruit trees from Tahiti to the Caribbean, where colonial powers intended to use it as a low-cost food supply for enslaved plantation workers. A mature breadfruit tree can yield up to 200 fruits per season. The fruit, roughly cantaloupe-sized, is starchy and potato-like when unripe, softer and sweeter when ripe. It can be roasted, boiled, fried, or dried, and ground into flour. Caloric yield per acre from a breadfruit grove exceeds that of many conventional grain crops. The reason breadfruit disappeared from Western food systems is straightforward. It spoils within approximately 3 days of harvest. A food economy built around refrigeration and long-distance supply chains has no use for a fruit with no shelf life, regardless of its nutritional or caloric value. In Hawaii, Fiji, and across Polynesia, communities that never oriented around industrial food distribution still eat it regularly. 4. Beta vulgaris maritima. Sea beet. On the rocky, salt-exposed coastlines of Europe and North Africa, Beta vulgaris maritima grows in conditions that exclude most other edible plants. Sea beet is the wild progenitor of every cultivated beet, chard, and sugar beet. Its leaves are thick, glossy, edible raw or cooked, and high in vitamins A and C. When cooked, they behave identically to chard or spinach. What makes sea beet practically significant is its tolerance for degraded growing conditions, saline, nutrient-poor, wind-exposed soils that conventional agriculture cannot use. It was set aside not because its cultivated descendants were superior in all respects, but because they were more convenient. The original plant continues to grow along coastlines where food supply infrastructure does not reach. 5. Mesquite. Across the Sonoran Desert, the Atacama, arid regions of Argentina and Chile, and parts of Africa and the Middle East, various species of prosopis, mesquite, have provided reliable sustenance for thousands of years. The seed pods are nutritionally dense, producing a flour sometimes called pinole or algarobo meal that contains slow-releasing sugars, significant protein, and dietary fiber. For desert populations including the Tohono O'odham Nation of Arizona, mesquite was a dietary cornerstone in landscapes where few other food plants could survive. The flour has a mild caramel-like flavor and was used to make flatbread. Mesquite is currently classified as an invasive weed across much of the American Southwest. Land managers actively remove it because it competes with cattle grazing operations. The same plant that sustained human populations in these landscapes for roughly 10,000 years is now routinely destroyed. 6. Nopal opuntia.
Opuntia cactus provides multiple food sources from a single plant, edible pads, edible fruit, and hydration in environments where water access is itself a survival variable. The pads, once despinned, can be eaten raw, grilled, boiled, or pickled.
They are high in fiber, antioxidants, and have documented effects on blood sugar regulation. The fruit is sweet, hydrating, and calorie-dense. In Mexico, where opuntia appears on the national flag, nopal has remained a standard food crop and is sold in markets and eaten daily. Across most English-speaking countries, the same plant growing in arid and semi-arid environments, which cover large portions of the American Southwest, Australia, Southern Europe, and Africa, is not recognized as food by most of the population living near it. 7. Camas. Camas grows across the prairies and meadows of the Pacific Northwest, producing blue-purple flowers in spring above starchy, inulin-rich bulbs that were central to the food systems of the Nez Perce, Shoshone, Flathead, and other Columbia Plateau nations. Seasonal migrations and social gatherings were organized around camas harvests. When slow-cooked in earthen pits, the bulbs convert their inulin content to fructose, developing a deep sweetness that early European explorers documented finding genuinely palatable. European settlement eliminated camas prairies within a generation. Fields were plowed for wheat and oats. Pigs released to forage consumed the bulbs across entire growing areas. A critical identification warning applies here. Death camas, Anticlea venenosa, grows in similar environments and is visually similar before flowering. During flowering, the distinction is clear. Death camas produces white or cream flowers. Camassia quamash produces blue. This was knowledge transmitted across generations within the communities that depended on the plant. When that transmission stopped, so did the safety it provided. 8. Sunchoke. Helianthus tuberosus, the Jerusalem artichoke or sunchoke, is native to North America, where it served as an important food source for numerous indigenous nations. It was brought to Europe in the 1600s, where it gained brief popularity before being displaced by the potato. The plant is exceptionally productive and requires minimal cultivation. It tolerates drought, cold, and poor soil, regrows from any tuber fragment left in the ground, and yields prolifically from a single planting. The tubers have a mild, nutty flavor comparable to a mild potato and are rich in inulin.
That same inulin content is responsible for a well-documented, affects significant digestive discomfort when consumed in large quantities by people unaccustomed to it.
This should be understood as a preparation consideration rather than a deterrent. Among commonly available food plants that require minimal agricultural infrastructure, sunchoke is one of the most practical options for anyone interested in food self-sufficiency. 9. Canna edulis. Archaeological evidence from Peru places the cultivation of Canna edulis, known as Akira in South America, Queensland arrowroot elsewhere, at over 4,500 years ago. The plant's rhizomes produce a starch that is among the most digestible of any food plant, a quality of practical value when the digestive system is compromised by illness or physical stress. The starch granules are the largest produced by any food plant, which simplifies extraction using basic processing tools. The rhizomes can be cooked directly, or the starch can be washed out, dried, and used as a thickener, porridge base, or flour substitute. Akira grows prolifically in tropical and subtropical environments. Industrial agriculture moved away from it because its starch yield per hectare is lower than cassava or corn. The loss of crop diversity that follows from optimizing entirely for yield per hectare is, at a systems level, a reduction in resilience, the capacity to sustain food production across varying and disrupted conditions. 10. Zizania palustris, northern wild rice. Zizania palustris grows in the shallow lakes and slow rivers of the Great Lakes region and has sustained the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, for thousands of years. They call it manumin. It is distinct from the commercial wild rice sold in most grocery stores, which is typically a cultivated hybrid. True wild rice contains more protein than nearly any other grain and provides all essential amino acids in a more balanced ratio than wheat or corn. It grows in water, occupying ecological niches that conventional grain agriculture cannot reach, and is harvested by canoe. Wild rice was not displaced by a superior alternative. It was displaced because it could not be harvested by combine, grown in monoculture rows, or standardized for commodity markets. Commercial grain systems had no mechanism for incorporating a food that required a canoe and a lake. The grain continued growing. The economic infrastructure to distribute it widely did not develop.
For most of recorded human history, food security was not a function of supply chains. It was a function of knowing which plants grew in the surrounding landscape and how to use them. That knowledge was specific, practical, and transmitted deliberately across generations. Much of it was lost not because it became obsolete, but because the systems that replaced it made it seem unnecessary. The plants described here are still growing. What has diminished is the knowledge of what they are.